The sound of laughter cut through the air like a knife, mocking and cruel, as Nora Bailey stood in the doorway of the Prairie Rose restaurant, clutching her flour-dusted apron with trembling hands. The year was 1876, and Sweetwater Creek, Wyoming territory, had never been kind to outsiders, especially not to a woman trying to make her own way as a cook. "I wouldn't feed that slop to my horses," called Jasper Wilson, the town banker, as he pushed away the plate of stew she'd prepared. The other men at the table roared with laughter, their faces ruddy from whiskey and meanness. Nora bit her lip, holding back tears that threatened to spill. At 22, she'd come west after her parents died, hoping to find purpose in this frontier town. She'd spent her life savings to buy this small restaurant from old Mrs. Henderson, but in the 3 weeks since opening, she'd faced nothing but ridicule. The restaurant door swung open, the late afternoon sun casting a tall shadow across the wooden floor. The laughter died as Ethan Lockhart stepped inside, trail dust coating his denim pants and faded blue shirt. His hat, pushed back on his head, revealed eyes the color of a summer sky, though they were narrowed now as he surveyed the scene. "Gentlemen," he said, his voice carrying the quiet authority of a man who didn't need to yell to be heard. At 28, Ethan had earned respect the hard way, building his ranch from nothing after returning from the war. Nora straightened her shoulders, embarrassment burning her cheeks. "I was just clearing up, Mr. Lockhart. The kitchen's closed." "I've been riding since dawn," Ethan said, hanging his hat on a peg by the door. "And I heard from Mrs. Miller that the Prairie Rose serves the best food in 3 counties. He nodded toward the table of men. "These fellows leaving means there's a seat for me," Jasper snorted. "Your funeral, Lockhart. The woman can't cook worth beans." Ethan's gaze never left Nora's face. "I'll eat every bite and ask for more." The men shuffled out, muttering among themselves, leaving Ethan alone with Nora in the small restaurant. "You don't have to do this," Nora said once they'd gone. "I know my cooking isn't what folks around here are used to. Why don't you let me be the judge of that?" Ethan settled at a small table by the window. "Whatever you've got warming on the stove will do just fine." Nora hesitated, then returned to the kitchen. Her hands shook as she ladled the thick venison stew into a bowl, adding a slice of cornbread she'd baked that morning. Those men were right, her cooking wasn't like the plain fare most establishments served. Her mother had taught her to use herbs and spices, to coax flavor from simple ingredients. When she placed the food before Ethan, she held her breath. He looked at it for a long moment, then picked up his spoon and took a bite. His expression remained unreadable as he chewed. "Miss Bailey," he finally said, looking up at her with something like wonder in his eyes, "this might be the best stew I've ever tasted." "You're just being kind," she said, not daring to believe him. "I've never been accused of that particular fault." He took another spoonful. The rosemary and thyme unexpected but perfect with the venison. Nora's eyes widened. "You know herbs. My mother was from Boston. Brought her garden with her when my father dragged us west." He broke off a piece of cornbread. "No one's cooked like this since she passed." Nora sat across from him, hope flickering to life inside her. "The men in town, they want the same beans and bacon they've always had. They don't understand my food." "Then they're fools," Ethan said simply. He continued eating, and true to his word, he cleaned his plate and asked for more. That evening marked the beginning of a change in Nora's life. Ethan returned the next day and the day after that. Soon, he was bringing ranch hands with him. "They need to taste real cooking," he explained, as 4 dusty cowboys removed their hats and filed into her restaurant. Within 2 weeks, other women from town began to appear at lunchtime. Mrs. Miller, the milliner, confided that she'd always enjoyed Nora's food but had been afraid to say so after the men had been so vocal in their criticism. "Men fear what they don't understand," Ethan told Nora one evening as he helped her close up. "Even if it's just bay leaves and marjoram." Nora laughed, the sound surprising her. She couldn't remember the last time she'd laughed. As spring warmed into summer, Ethan became a fixture at the Prairie Rose. Sometimes he'd arrive with wildflowers he'd picked on the range. "For your tables," he'd say, but his eyes told Nora they were really for her. On a particularly busy Saturday, Nora was rushing between tables when she heard a commotion outside. She stepped onto the wooden sidewalk to see a crowd gathering around the stagecoach that had just arrived. "What's happening?" she asked Mrs. Miller, who was craning her neck to see. "The Hollister brothers are back," the older woman said grimly. "They've been causing trouble up and down the territory." Nora had heard of the Hollisters' 3 brothers who'd left Sweetwater Creek years ago after their father lost the family ranch to gambling debts. They'd turned to robbery and worse, their names whispered with fear. The crowd parted as 3 men swaggered toward the saloon across the street. The tallest Wade Hollister, Nora presumed, stopped when he spotted her. His gaze traveled from her face down to her flour-dusted apron, and his lips curved in a smile that sent a chill down her spine. Nora retreated into her restaurant, locking the door behind her. She told herself she was being foolish, but something about Wade Hollister's eyes had frightened her. That evening, Ethan arrived later than usual, his expression troubled. "You've heard the Hollisters are back," he said, not a question. Nora nodded. "Will there be trouble?" Ethan's jaw tightened. "There's always trouble with the Hollisters. Their father and mine were partners once, before James Hollister gambled away everything they had." "I didn't know." "Ancient history," Ethan said, though his expression suggested otherwise. "But Wade never forgave my father for refusing to bail his out, made threats before they left town." "What should we do?" Ethan reached across the table, covering her hand with his. The touch sent warmth spreading up her arm. "Nothing. They'll move on once they've caused enough mischief." But the Hollister brothers didn't move on. They took rooms above the saloon and spent their days drinking and their nights carousing. Rumors swirled that they had money, too much money for men who didn't work. A week after their arrival, Nora was preparing to close when the restaurant door banged open. Wade Hollister stood there, flanked by his brothers. They reeked of whiskey and malice. "Well now," Wade drawled, "if it isn't the little cook everyone's talking about." He sauntered in, running a finger along one of the clean tables. "We've come for dinner." Nora's mouth went dry. "I'm closed for the night." "Open for Lockhart, though, ain't you?" the youngest brother sneered. "Saw him heading this way not 30 minutes ago." "Ethan had business in Cheyenne," Nora said, backing toward the kitchen where she kept a shotgun beneath the counter. "He won't be back until tomorrow." Wade smiled, revealing a gold tooth. "Then I guess it's just us for dinner." He pulled out a chair. "My brothers and I have developed sophisticated tastes in our travels. Let's see if your cooking lives up to its reputation." Nora knew refusing would only make things worse. With trembling hands, she went to the kitchen and prepared plates of the stew she'd made that day, along with the last of the cornbread. When she returned, Wade was sitting with his boots on one of her clean tables. His brothers had helped themselves to the coffee she'd left warming. "Here," she said, setting down the food. "Now please eat and go, I need to close up." Wade took a bite, then spat it onto the floor. "What is this slop? Trying to poison us with your fancy Eastern cooking?" His brothers laughed, and the middle one, Nora thought his name was Frank, knocked his plate to the floor. "Maybe we should teach you how to really please a man," he said, rising from his chair. The door opened again, and Nora's heart leapt, expecting Ethan. Instead, Sheriff Thomas stepped in, his hand resting on his holstered gun. "Evening, gentlemen," he said calmly. "Miss Bailey." "Sheriff," Wade said, leaning back in his chair. "Just enjoying some dinner. Looks to me like you're making a mess and frightening the lady." The sheriff's voice was mild, but his eyes were hard. "I think it's time you boys headed back to the saloon." For a moment, Nora thought Wade might argue, but then he shrugged and stood. "The food's not worth staying for anyway." As they filed out, Wade paused beside Nora. "This isn't over," he whispered, his breath hot against her ear. "Lockhart can't protect you forever." After they'd gone, Sheriff Thomas helped Nora clean up the mess. "Ethan asked me to keep an eye on you while he was away," he explained. "Good thing he did." That night, Nora barely slept, Wade's threat echoing in her mind. What did he mean about Ethan protecting her? And why did the thought of Ethan stir such complicated feelings inside her? When Ethan returned the next day, he was furious upon hearing what had happened. "I should never have left," he said, pacing the restaurant floor after closing time. "You can't be here all the time," Nora pointed out. "And I managed just fine with Sheriff Thomas's help." Ethan stopped pacing, his expression softening as he looked at her. "You're the strongest woman I've ever known, Nora Bailey, but the Hollisters are dangerous men." "Why does Wade hate you so much?" Ethan sighed, running a hand through his hair. "It's more complicated than I let on. Wade's father didn't just lose the ranch to gambling. He lost it to my father." "But you said they were partners." "They were, but James Hollister was desperate for money. He bet his half of the ranch on a card game with my father." Ethan's voice was heavy with old regret. "My father won fair and square, but the Hollisters never saw it that way." Nora touched his arm gently. "That's not your fault. Wade doesn't see it that way, and now—" Ethan hesitated, then took her hand. "Nora, I need to tell you something. The reason I went to Cheyenne, I've been thinking about our future." "Our future?" Nora's heart quickened. "I know it hasn't been long, but I've never felt this way about anyone. When I'm with you, I feel like I've found something I didn't even know I was missing." Before Nora could respond, a gunshot cracked the night air, followed by shouting from the direction of the saloon. Ethan was on his feet immediately. "Stay here and lock the door," he ordered, reaching for his gun belt. "Ethan," Nora started, but he was already gone. Disobeying his instructions, Nora moved to the window. Across the street, flames were licking up the side of the saloon. Men poured out, coughing and cursing. Among them, she saw the Hollister brothers, Wade shouting orders to his siblings. More gunshots sounded, and Nora's blood froze when she saw Ethan in the middle of the street, facing Wade. "This ends now, Hollister," Ethan called. "I know you robbed the Cheyenne stage last week. The marshal's on his way." Wade laughed, the sound carrying even over the chaos. "You always were self-righteous, Lockhart, just like your father." Nora couldn't hear what Ethan said next, but she saw Wade's hand move to his gun. Without thinking, she burst through the restaurant door and ran toward them. "Ethan!" she screamed. Both men turned at the sound of her voice. In that split second of distraction, Frank Hollister, emerging from the shadows beside the burning saloon, fired his gun. Ethan staggered but remained standing, returning fire with deadly accuracy. Frank fell, and Wade, seeing his brother down, turned his rage toward Nora. "You!" he snarled, raising his gun. Ethan threw himself forward, tackling Wade to the ground. They grappled in the dirt as Sheriff Thomas and other townsmen rushed to help. In the confusion, the youngest Hollister brother slipped away. Lost in the night, when it was over, Wade was in custody, Frank was dead, and Ethan was bleeding from a bullet that had grazed his side. "You could have been killed," Nora scolded as she cleaned his wound in the back room of the restaurant. "What were you thinking, confronting them like that?" "I was thinking I needed to end this before they hurt you," Ethan winced as she applied antiseptic. I couldn't bear it if anything happened to you, Nora, her hand stilled on his side. I feel the same way about you, she admitted softly. When I saw you facing Wade, I was so afraid. Ethan caught her hand, bringing it to his lips. I meant what I said earlier, about our future. We have a future then, Nora asked, hardly daring to hope. If you'll have me. Ethan's eyes were solemn. I'm not a perfect man, Nora. I've got a ranch that demands most of my time and a past full of ghosts, but I love you. I think I've loved you since that first bowl of stew. Nora laughed through sudden tears. Is that all it took? A good meal? It wasn't just the food. Ethan's voice grew serious. It was your courage, your determination to stay true to yourself even when everyone mocked you. I admired that from the start. Nora leaned forward, pressing her forehead to his. I love you too, Ethan Lockhart, even if you did only fall for me because of my cooking. The next few weeks passed in a blur. Wade Hollister was taken to Cheyenne to stand trial for stage robbery, with Sheriff Thomas escorting him personally. The youngest brother had disappeared, but without Wade's influence, he was unlikely to cause trouble. As summer reached its peak, Ethan surprised Nora by bringing her to his ranch one Sunday afternoon. The rocking L spread out before them, acres of good grazing land with mountains in the distance. The ranch house, nestled in a grove of cottonwoods, was larger than she'd expected, with a wide porch and curtains at the windows. It's beautiful, Nora breathed as Ethan helped her down from the wagon. My mother tried to make it a home, he said, taking her hand. After she died, I'm afraid I let things slide. It needs a woman's touch again. He led her inside, where a middle-aged woman was setting a table with Ethan's best dishes. Mrs. Perkins has been helping out with the housekeeping, Ethan explained. She's prepared us a special dinner. Nora looked at the table in surprise. It was set for more than just the two of them. Are we expecting company? Just a few friends, Ethan said mysteriously. They should be here soon. True to his word, wagons began arriving shortly after. Mrs. Miller came with her husband, followed by Sheriff Thomas and his wife. Several of Ethan's ranch hands and their families joined them, and even Reverend Clark made an appearance. What's the occasion? Nora asked, bewildered by the gathering. Ethan merely smiled and led her to the table, seating her at one end while he took the other. Mrs. Perkins served a meal that, while simple, was prepared with obvious care. When everyone had eaten, Ethan stood, tapping his glass for attention. Friends, thank you for coming today. You all know Miss Bailey, whose cooking has transformed our little town. There were murmurs of agreement and several appreciative nods. What you may not know, Ethan continued, is that she's transformed me as well. He moved to Nora's side, taking her hand. Nora came to Sweetwater Creek a stranger, facing mockery and doubt. But she persevered, showing us all what courage looks like. Nora felt her cheeks warm with emotion as Ethan knelt beside her chair. I promised once that I'd eat every bite of your cooking and ask for more, he said softly. I'm asking now, Nora Bailey. Will you marry me and let me spend my life asking for more of everything you have to give? Tears blurred Nora's vision as she nodded. Yes, she managed to say. Yes, I will. The gathered friends erupted in cheers as Ethan slipped a simple gold band onto her finger. Later, after the guests had gone and they sat alone on the porch watching the sunset, Nora asked, How long have you been planning this? Since the night of the fire, Ethan admitted. Life's too short to waste time, especially out here. What about the restaurant? Nora asked. I can't just abandon it. I wouldn't ask you to, Ethan said. Mrs. Perkins's daughter, Rebecca, is looking for work. She's a fair cook who could learn your recipes. You could oversee things, create new dishes. The restaurant could expand even. You've thought of everything? I try to. He kissed her hand where his ring now rested. "All I want is for you to be happy, Nora." "I am happy," she said. "Happier than I ever thought possible." They were married 2 weeks later in the town church, with the entire community in attendance. Even those who had once mocked Nora's cooking came to wish them well and enjoy the wedding feast she had prepared herself. As fall approached, Nora divided her time between the ranch and the restaurant, where Rebecca was proving to be an apt pupil. The Prairie Rose's reputation continued to grow, with travelers often going out of their way to sample what the stage drivers now called the best eating house in Wyoming territory. One crisp October evening, Nora was preparing dinner in the ranch house kitchen when Ethan returned from checking the herds. He came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and nuzzling her neck. "Something smells wonderful," he murmured. "It's a new recipe," Nora said, leaning back against him. "Rabbit stew with juniper berries I found growing near the creek." Adventurous," Ethan teased. "Remember when the town thought rosemary was exotic?" Nora laughed, turning in his arms to face him. "They're learning, mister. Peterson asked for my pickle recipe yesterday. Will wonders never cease?" Ethan kissed her softly. "I have news. I saw Sheriff Thomas in town today." "Oh," Nora returned to stirring her stew. "Wade Hollister was convicted. 20 years in the territorial prison." Nora let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "And the younger brother? No sign of him. Thomas thinks he may have headed to California." Ethan took plates from the cabinet. "We're safe, Nora. It's over." That night, as they lay together in their bed, Nora traced the scar on Ethan's side where the bullet had grazed him. "I was so afraid I'd lose you," she whispered. "Never," Ethan promised, pulling her closer. "You're stuck with me now, Mrs. Lockhart, for better or worse." "Mostly better," Nora said, smiling against his chest. "Definitely better," Ethan agreed. "Although I did have to let out my belt a notch since we married. Your cooking will be the death of me yet." Nora laughed. "You did promise to eat every bite, and I always keep my promises." Ethan's voice grew serious. "I promise to love you every day of my life, Nora, to cherish you and protect you, to build a life so good that you'll never regret taking a chance on a dusty rancher who fell in love over a bowl of stew." "I could never regret you," Nora said softly. "You believed in me when no one else did." As winter settled over the Wyoming territory, bringing snow that blanketed the ranch in pristine white, Nora found herself happier than she'd ever imagined possible. The restaurant thrived under Rebecca's daily management, and Nora was free to create new recipes and special dishes that brought customers from miles around. At home, she and Ethan settled into the rhythms of ranch life. She learned to ride alongside him, checking fences and cattle. He learned to appreciate the garden she planted, full of herbs and vegetables that would flourish in the summer months. When spring arrived, bringing with it new calves and green grass, Nora had news of her own to share. "Ethan," she said one evening as they sat on the porch after dinner, "I need to tell you something." He looked at her, concern crossing his features. "Is everything all right?" "Everything is perfect," Nora said, taking his hand and placing it on her still flat stomach. "We're going to have a baby." The joy that transformed Ethan's face was everything Nora had hoped for. He gathered her into his arms, holding her as if she were made of the finest china. "A baby," he whispered against her hair. "Our baby. Are you happy?" She asked, though she already knew the answer. Happy doesn't begin to describe it. Ethan pulled back to look into her eyes. "You've given me everything, Nora. A home filled with love, a purpose beyond just surviving, and now a family of our own." As the months passed and Nora's belly grew, Ethan became even more protective, insisting she rest more and work less. She indulged him to a point, but refused to be confined to the house. "The baby and I need fresh air," she would say. heading out to check on her garden or walk to the creek that ran along the property. In late autumn, just as the first snow was beginning to fall, Nora gave birth to a daughter they named Elizabeth, after Ethan's mother. With her father's blue eyes and her mother's determined spirit, Elizabeth quickly became the center of their world. "She'll be a force to reckon with," Mrs. Miller predicted when she came to visit, watching as the infant gripped Ethan's finger with surprising strength. "Just like her mother," Ethan agreed proudly. Years passed, and the Lockhart family grew. Elizabeth was joined by a brother, James, and later by twin girls, Sarah and Rebecca. The ranch prospered, as did the Prairie Rose, which expanded to include a small hotel for travelers. Sweetwater Creek grew from a rough frontier town into a respectable community, with a proper school where Elizabeth would one day teach after returning from college back east. James would take over the ranch, while the twins would run the restaurant together, creating new recipes that blended their mother's Eastern influences with Western traditions. But through all the changes and growth, some things remained constant. Every Sunday without fail, the family would gather around the dinner table, joined often by friends and neighbors. Nora would serve her famous stew, and Ethan, his hair now streaked with silver, would eat every bite and ask for more, just as he had promised all those years ago. And sometimes, when the children were grown and it was just the two of them again, Nora would catch Ethan looking at her with the same wonder he'd shown on that first evening in her restaurant. "What are you thinking?" she would ask. "I'm thinking how lucky I am," he would answer, taking her hand across the table. "How one bowl of stew changed my life forever." "It wasn't the stew," Nora would say with a smile. "It was you, having the courage to defend me when everyone else mocked my cooking." "It was us," Ethan would correct gently. "Two people brave enough to believe in each other when the world told us not to." And in that belief, they had built a life richer and more satisfying than either could have imagined on that spring day in 1876, when a dusty cowboy walked into a struggling restaurant and promised to eat every bite and ask for more.